Is a breakout season coming for one of the Longhorns' most prized recruits? We'll talk about it on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Intro!
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are locked on to the Texas Longhorns. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner, Texas grad, Austin native, and longtime sports radio host here in the Lone Star State. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell all of your Longhorn friends about Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week a little bit later in the episode. On today's show, I chop it up with Shelby Dermer, who covers Xavier basketball for the Cincinnati Enquirer. We go in-depth to preview tomorrow's first four matchup between the Longhorns and the Xavier Musketeers. That's coming up, but first is a breakout season coming for sophomore wide receiver Ryan Wingo. Some Longhorn football news from over the weekend. According to Anwar Richardson of orangebloods.com, Texas wide receiver Ryan Wingo, quote, recently had LASIK surgery after the coaching staff discovered he was struggling with very poor vision after struggling in workouts. Apparently, he dealt with it last season, end quote. A little bit more from Anwar. Why did it take so long for this to be discovered? I was told Wingo was dropping passes at an alarming rate during winter conditioning. Wingo eventually told the staff that he could not see the ball until it was close to his body and struggled to track it in the air. The staff had Wingo see an optometrist, and that's when everyone discovered that the receiver had very bad eyesight. By the way, Wingo's eyesight was tested last year, and everything seemed fine. Either Wingo's vision had a rapid decline or something was missed during last year's exam. It looks like Wingo will be able to clearly see those passes from Arch Manning this year, end quote. So Ryan Wingo, who had a pretty solid true freshman campaign in Austin, 29 catches, 472 yards, and 2 touchdowns, apparently he did all of that with bad vision. Imagine what he could do with good vision. Being able to see kind of matters when you're a wide receiver. And hey, Ryan Wingo and I don't have much in common, but now we have two things. Number one, we both went to Texas. Number two, we both had LASIK, and it makes a difference. I mean, I wore contacts for years before I got LASIK. It doesn't sound like Wingo was even doing that. I couldn't see a damn thing without my contacts, and even with contact lenses, I had some trouble seeing. I can't imagine trying to play high-level college football in the SEC without being able to see incredibly well. Enough of the me comparisons. Maybe I could have been a wide receiver at Texas if I had done LASIK. Nah, never mind. Look, I was already excited about the step Ryan Wingo was going to take in year two, but now I'm more excited about what we're going to see from the former five-star recruit. And it was an interesting freshman year. I mentioned the numbers, not too bad for a true freshman considering all of the talent that Texas had in the wide receiver room last year. But Wingo got off to a great start. 4 catches for 70 yards in the season opener against Colorado State. He had that 55-yard run against Michigan up in Ann Arbor that almost went for a touchdown. And then Wingo scored his first touchdown of the year against UTSA the following week on a 75-yard catch from Arch Manning. And then he had 3 catches, by the way, for 127 yards in that win over UTSA. And then he scored another touchdown against ULM. But the production dropped a little bit. He didn't have a touchdown the rest of the year. He didn't top 50 yards in any game in the SEC. Now, again, the level of competition increased, and he wasn't playing as much. Texas had Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond and Silas Bolden on the roster. Those guys were much more experienced and understandably were getting more playing time as the year progressed. But now I kind of wonder if it was more than that. Like Ryan Wingo had 4 drops last season, perhaps further evidence of these eyesight issues that Anwar had reported. You know, we all saw what Ryan Williams at Alabama and Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State and Cam Coleman. I mean, we all saw what those guys were doing. We wanted Ryan Wingo to be doing that stuff here in Austin, and it didn't quite happen. Maybe now we have our reason. And look, the Texas coaching staff gave a very serious vote of confidence to Ryan Wingo in this offseason. That's another reason why I feel really good about what he's going to do in year two. I mean, Texas opted not to bring in any transfer portal wide receivers. Again, they got 3 last year. They obviously brought in Adonai Mitchell 2 years ago. We know how good he was. They've had a ton of success with portal receivers. They chose not to sign one in the early window. Now, of course, they could grab somebody after the spring, but as of this moment, Ryan Wingo is one of two Longhorn wide receivers with any returning production at Texas. And the other one is DeAndre Moore, who's dealing with a toe injury that's going to keep him limited for the spring. At least that's what Steve Sarkisian told us last week. By the way, that DeAndre Moore injury is not new. He suffered that late last season. So the coaching staff knew that DeAndre Moore was going to be limited in the spring. They knew that they didn't have anybody else at wide receiver or at tight end, for that matter, who had any returning production at Texas, and they still opted to not bring in a transfer. So to me, that is this staff, Steve Sarkisian, Chris Jackson, Kyle Flood, etc., believing that big things are coming for Ryan Wingo. And I agree with him. And I trust Sark and I trust Chris Jackson with the job that they've done developing wide receivers here in Austin over these last few years. They've got the benefit of the doubt for that position room. And for Ryan Wingo, what a golden opportunity for him. I mean, he's going to be the number one guy in spring ball. He's going to have ample opportunity to showcase his talent and prove his coaches right, that they didn't need to go get anybody from the portal and that they don't need to go get anybody in the portal once spring ball is over. This guy's a freak athlete. Again, a former five-star recruit, huge recruiting get out of the state of Missouri. Texas held off a number of competitors, including the in-state Missouri Tigers at the very end of Ryan Wingo's recruitment. That was a big signing for Texas last year. 6'2", 210. He ran a 10.55, 100 in high school. He's just a rare combination of size and speed. And again, he did some good things as a freshman, but now you tell me he can actually see what's going on. I think that's going to make life a lot easier for Ryan Wingo. And I think, again, more reason to believe that this is going to be a massive 2025 for the second-year wide receiver. And, you know, it's funny. I was trying to think of other examples of this happening at Texas. I remember a guy who played for the Longhorns back when I was in school, Michael Thompson. I'm sure a name a lot of you remember. He dealt with something like this. Now, he didn't get LASIK, but apparently he wore glasses off the field, and he didn't wear glasses or contacts or any correctional frames while he played during the first 3 years of his Texas career under Mac Brown. Charlie Strong gets here in 2014, and he's like, dude, what can you see? Like, what's going on here? And Michael Thompson, they did some tests, and it turned out he needed contacts. He goes and gets contacts, and his game took off in 2014. He ended up getting drafted in the 5th round by the Giants because of what he did after he could see. Again, vision matters. Michael Thompson ended up spending a couple of years in the league once he got that vision corrected. Who knows if any of that happens if he doesn't get contact lenses. I think of another example. This is obviously not a UT specific example, but Andre Johnson. Man, when he got to the league, he was a top 5 pick out of Miami. But when he got to Houston, they tested his vision. They realized it wasn't very good. They gave him contacts, and boom, one gold jacket later, the rest is history. Andre Johnson, one of the best wide receivers the game has ever seen. So, goes without saying, you don't need me to tell you that your vision matters in this life. Your vision matters in this sport. And yeah, being able to see a football coming at you, that matters a lot. So, it's almost a miracle that Ryan Wingo was able to do what he did despite not having great vision. And again, there's a chance it got worse over the course of the offseason. When I was dealing with contacts and glasses and bad vision before I got LASIK, my eyesight got worse every single year. So it happens. It's a natural thing. As you get older, as you mature, as your body develops, sometimes your eyesight gets worse. Maybe that's what happened with Ryan Wingo. But yeah, you tell me he did what he did in his first year without having 20/20 vision. Now I think the sky is the limit for Ryan Wingo. And again, the coaching staff trusts him, and he's got the opportunity to prove them right by having a great spring session. You know, we got to work out a lot with Arch Manning last year because Wingo was working out with the twos in practice, and obviously Arch Manning was as well. So you would think those guys have some chemistry already built up, and hopefully that chemistry continues to improve this year. This could be the key to Ryan Wingo having a monster year in 2025, a monster year in 2025. And all of those Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith and Cam Coleman comparisons, they could all start to come to fruition this year. I think it's important for Texas because you're breaking in a first-year starter at quarterback. You want as much wide receiver help as you could possibly get. And again, I expect Ryan Wingo to have a really, really big year for Texas and be a huge part of this passing game in 2025. You tell me, comment below with your thoughts. Do you think the sophomore wide receiver breaks out this coming season. All right. We're one day away from Texas opening up NCAA tournament play in Dayton. The Longhorns getting set to take on Xavier in the first four. To preview the game, I sat down with Xavier insider Shelby Dermer. We'll let you hear the conversation next right here on Locked On Longhorns. But first, I mentioned it earlier. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week, the Florida Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points per game. They just dominated the SEC tournament, winning each game by at least 9 points. And, of course, they wrapped up the title on Sunday. They wrapped up the fourth number one seed in the NCAA tournament as well, and they are the nation's most efficient offense right now. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. That's exactly what the Florida Gators have done here. And it's clear that our Team of the Week is ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. And today's episode is also brought to you by our friends at Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. It's so easy to do. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in less than 10 minutes. And in many cases, no health exam is required. So you get that peace of mind. You can find that affordable coverage. And again, you can do this from your couch and get it done in less than 10 minutes. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Again, fabric.com/lockedoncollege. All right, back here on Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. Texas and Xavier will meet for the third time in program history tomorrow night in the first four. The winner will move on to the round of 64 to play Illinois on Friday. To preview the matchup, here is part one of my conversation with Xavier beat writer Shelby Dermer. Joining us now to talk about this Wednesday's first four matchup between the Texas Longhorns and the Xavier Musketeers. He is Shelby Dermer, who covers the Xavier basketball program for the Cincinnati Enquirer, and he's nice enough to give us a few minutes to talk about this week's game. Shelby, thanks so much for the time, man. How are you today?
Brad, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing great. I think both of us are in a similar boat, right? Selection Sunday was scary, a little anxious. But obviously, both of our teams end up making it into the NCAA tournament. I want to start right there. How surprised, or were you surprised at all, that Xavier did hear its name called on Selection Sunday?
Couple of elements to that, Brad, and maybe not so surprised that they got the bid. My surprise really came from that there was that two-team cushion with San Diego State and North Carolina. I mean, you're Xavier fans everywhere, and of course, media too. Watching the games on Sunday, particularly that Memphis UAB matchup, and Memphis trailing at halftime, and Joe Lunardi comes on and says, hey, Xavier's the last team in. If Memphis can come back and win, they're the first team out if Memphis were to lose, and UAB is that bid stealer. But, going into the 3-day, 2.5-day wait Xavier had after losing to Marquette in that thrilling matchup at Madison Square Garden in the Big East Tournament quarterfinals, you had a lot of things really break Xavier's way. And, the Big East had a spotlight on it this time around because last year the bid stealers really impacted the bubble. And the Big East felt that with Providence, Seton Hall, and St. John's all having pretty strong resumes to get in the tournament. And all of them were left out. Providence went to the NIT. Seton Hall ended up winning the NIT. Rick Pitino said no thanks. So Xavier had a lot of things break their way Saturday and then especially Sunday with VCU taking out George Mason, another potential bid stealer in the A-10 at Capital One Arena in D.C., and then, of course, that Memphis game that I just mentioned. So If you're looking at FanDuel odds, I know Indiana fans don't want to talk about that with where their odds were at going into Selection Sunday, but as soon as Memphis started pulling away in the second half of that matchup, Xavier's odds on FanDuel at least were climbing up into the minus 350, closing in on almost minus 400 to make the NCAA tournament. So you had to feel pretty good. But the fact that they had that two-team cushion and they were the third two teams below them in the last four in was a surprising factor for sure.
Yeah, Shelby, tell us a little bit about this Xavier team. 21-11 this year, 13-7 in the Big East, which was tied for fourth in the conference. What are some of the strengths and maybe some of the weaknesses for this Musketeers team that the Longhorns are going to see on Wednesday?
Well, the committee won't take into consideration, and I think Sean Miller said this yesterday when he was talking about his playing days at Pitt, the last 10 games, how you were playing going into the tournament was always a factor. This time around, it's not as big of a factor, but certainly every coach wants to be playing their best basketball in the all-important months of February and March, and Xavier's been doing that. 12 of their last 16 games they won. They went 12-3 to end the regular season, a big 7-game winning streak where now looking back, if they have any slip-up in conference play, it may have cost them an at-large bid. So definitely playing their best basketball as the tournament comes around, which is what you want to do. So that's definitely a strength. They're getting some bench production from Jerome Hunter, a veteran who was on the Sweet 16 team 2 years ago, and Dante Maddox. I know Xavier fans really think he seems like a guy who's going to come into March Madness and take fans by storm with the way he can shoot the three and the way he's kind of been up and down off the bench. So those are definitely some strengths. Some weaknesses for Xavier is that some tight games this season, they've come up short, and especially games where they could have won, and that's why, if they weren't picked yesterday, it would have been a big season of what-ifs just continuing because their last two trips to Madison Square Garden, they had double-digit second-half leads against St. John's and Marquette. You win both of those, you're not worried about the bubble very much.
Right.
They cough up both of those big leads, and now they kind of had to sweat on Selection Sunday. So playing with the lead, keeping the lead, playing a full 40-minute effort, as Sean Miller said several times in press conferences, is definitely a concern going in. Xavier's ability to finish off games.
Yeah, you talked about that 7-game win streak to cap off the regular season, right? What changed? I know you mentioned bench production. Maybe that's a part of it, but what started working more for Xavier that got them off the bubble and actually into the tournament?
Well, for starters, the schedule kind of eased up.
Yeah.
And that was one thing where Xavier played such a front-loaded Big East schedule, and they were in a bunch of tight games, lost a lot of close games, pulled out some big wins in there, thinking at Marquette, that's the only quad one win on the resume, 59-57, going up to Pfizer Forum and holding that Marquette offense to just 57 points was big. They come back home and beat UConn at home at Cintas Center in a big environment. That was a close game. But then over that 7-game winning streak, they got to play Butler twice. They beat Providence twice. They came back home and played DePaul. Their last 6 games, they had 4 of them at home, and then one of those away games was just west in Butler in Indianapolis. So not a lot of travel. They got to rest a little bit, stayed at home, and it wasn't one thing just to beat the bottom teams of the Big East, but they did it convincingly. Over that 7-game winning streak, they won those games by 12.7 points per game, and that includes a 22-point drubbing of Creighton, which is a pretty impressive feat to pull off with how Creighton is always in March Madness, and they got a pretty tough draw against Louisville in the first round. So I think that was the biggest change for Xavier, and I think location of the game coming up on Wednesday is something you might touch on with how close it is to Cincinnati, but staying at home and really handling its business. And then maybe the other thing, like you mentioned, I talked about bench production, but Zach Freemantle coming back. That front-loaded Big East schedule got even harder when you have to go at UConn to Hartford and then come home and play Marquette without your best player, your leading scorer and rebounder. And they lose to UConn in overtime in Hartford at XL Center. UConn was ranked at the time. Then they come back home, play a Marquette team, lose by 2 on a controversial play at the buzzer when they come back and rally in that game. So the schedule eases up. Zach Freemantle comes back, and Xavier kind of becomes this well-oiled machine that played its best ball in March.
Shelby Dermer of the Cincinnati Enquirer joining us here talking Texas and Xavier. Yeah, you bring up the name Zach Freemantle. Shelby, I feel like that guy has been in college basketball since I was wearing diapers. I mean, he has been around the block a time or two. Was on the roster when Texas and Xavier met in the Sweet 16 in 2023, but he was hurt, so he didn't play in that game. Talk about Zach Freemantle and why he's such a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses.
Yeah, well, he's shown the ability to step out behind the arc and hit threes, but just down low, it seems like he's been sizzling as of late. I mean, he was in over 20 points the last 3 games in the regular season. He had another strong showing, after a slow start against Marquette. That kind of really turned into Ryan Conwell's show with 38 points in that matchup, but Zach was great too, except a crucial missed dunk in the second half that would have put Xavier up 6 with, I think, less than 10 minutes to go. And so, yeah, he's been the biggest story for Xavier just last year. He and Jerome Hunter, who did play in that Texas game in the Sweet 16, they both missed last year, and Xavier could not handle the front court injuries. This year, Xavier lost its starting center, Lucina Traore, to a torn ACL back in October, and it was up to Zach, Jerome, a little bit of John Hughley coming off the bench to kind of carry that weight down low for an undersized Xavier team. Fremantle's the tallest guy on the roster, just 6'9", so he's an undersized 5. He would have been the starting 4 had Traore not been hurt. So he's stepped up and played very physical, and I think defense was the question mark. Not a lot of people talk about Zach Fremantle's defense because he was such an offensive weapon for Xavier, and that's what he was known for. But he's playing some of the best defense of his career, too, and averaging about 7 rebounds a night.
Don't go anywhere. Part 2 of my conversation with Shelby Dermer is coming up. We'll talk about the potential home court advantage for Xavier, and Shelby will give his prediction for tomorrow night's game. Can the Longhorns pull off the upset and keep dancing? That's next on Locked on Longhorns. But first, shout out to a sponsor. Shout out to Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts who are ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or you need a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. You can find the right talent. It's fast and it's easy to hire, and cost-effective growth as well. Instead of hiring full-time, you can find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked on Longhorns, your team every day. Hey, those guys just said that. Is there an echo in here? I'm not sure. As promised, here is part 2 of my conversation with Xavier beat writer Shelby Dermer. Yeah, you talked about this game being in Dayton, right? About an hour away from Cincinnati, where Xavier is located. Is this going to be a full home court advantage for the Musketeers? Is there any chance the Dayton Flyers fans are like so against Xavier that they root for Texas? What type of crowd do you expect on Wednesday night?
Well, if you were on Twitter after the matchups were announced, it was Xavier fans. Is it Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday or Wednesday? Okay, it's Wednesday. Already bought my tickets.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it stands on if it's sold out or not yet. I'm sure it will be if it's not already. But, yeah, you have to think it's going to be a large contingent of Musketeer fans. Some of the assistant coaches, I know Ryan Reynolds was already on X saying, let's buy up all those tickets. We've never been this excited to play at UD Arena. So, yeah, I don't really know what to expect with I know there's going to be a ton of Xavier fans there. I don't know how well Texas travels, but I know UD is playing 2 hours before Xavier in the NIT in Boca Raton, so I don't know if any Dayton Flyers fans are hanging around or maybe going down to Florida for the nice weather, but it certainly should be a strong contingent of Musketeer faithful there at UD Arena.
Yeah, I think it'll be a home court advantage for the Musketeers for sure. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you about this matchup, Shelby, as we start to wrap up this conversation. What are your thoughts on Texas? What are your thoughts on how Xavier matches up with this Texas team, and kind of what's your confidence level that the Musketeers can get this win to move on to Friday?
Well, I think saying it should be a close game is nothing groundbreaking with the way the spread is right now. I think it opens Xavier as a 2-point favorite. I'm not sure where it's at now, but probably the home court advantage giving Xavier a little bump here. I look at Xavier, and one of the first categories I look to is how their opponent does in the turnover department. And I know Texas is 220 on KenPom in forcing turnovers defensively, a little lower than that in steal percentages. That's a positive for Xavier, just because you talk about the second half leads that Xavier's lost. I mentioned at St. John's at Madison Square Garden, and then against Marquette at Madison Square Garden last week. You look back at the Skyline Chili Crosstown shootout. They lost to UC. They were up 7 with about 8 minutes to go. Same way with a bad loss to TCU, which turned into a quad 2 down the stretch in Fort Worth. They lost by 4. Another game they were up 6 or 7 points. And it's been this offense that has so much firepower that when they're not giving away possessions, they're so dangerous. And when they are giving away possessions, it turns into gut-wrenching losses down the stretch, which is what we saw. So Xavier can keep the ball clean. I know Sean Miller, they aim to play with less than 10 turnovers. It's a feat they haven't done much, but they did it 4 times during that 7-game winning streak, and it showed. So looking at the turnover department, Texas's metrics in that range certainly favors Xavier. And then Texas, another advantage for Xavier, at least I think, is Texas defending the 3-point shot. Xavier's turned into a top 10 team in shooting threes, and Texas was, I think, 10th in the SEC in defending 3-pointers. So we'll see on that matchup. And then on the other side, block shots. I think if you're scrolling through KenPom, the most read box in Xavier's team sheet is going to be the block shots. I mentioned Zach Fremantle's the tallest Musketeer in this shorter lineup at just 6'9". So Xavier has their shots blocked at one of the highest rates in the country, and Texas is pretty good. So Caden Shedrick maybe has an advantage in that matchup down low. And then obviously if you're Texas, Trey Johnson, you have a lottery pick who can go off at any time. That's always going to be a concern for Xavier's defense.
Yeah, 2 final questions here, Shelby. Number 1, a prediction. Who you got on Wednesday? And then I'll ask you a Sean Miller question here in a moment, but we'll start with the prediction.
Well, I know I'm on your show, but I'm sorry. but I think maybe the home court advantage pushes Xavier, gets them over the hump in a close game, and they find a way to pull it out and keeping the ball clean. So I'd say Xavier 74-70.
Hey, you're a company man. You work for the Cincinnati Enquirer. You don't work for me or in Austin, so I expect you to pick the Musketeers. I want to ask you about Sean Miller, though, because look, I don't know if you know this, but a couple of years ago when Texas and Xavier met in the Sweet 16, Rodney Terry was an interim coach at the time, and no one was really sure if he was going to get the job on a full-time basis here in Austin. And Sean Miller was a very popular name, and a lot of Longhorn fans thought Sean Miller was going to be a top candidate if Texas moved on from Rodney Terry. Obviously, they hired Rodney Terry, so we don't find out what that alternate universe could have been. But your thoughts on Sean Miller, just the job he's done. Obviously, he's been at Xavier a couple of different times. Your thoughts on him as a coach and just what he's been able to build in his second stint up there in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it's been impressive. So you go back to he comes in the very first year to take a team that had just won an NIT championship but hadn't made the NCAA tournament in 4 years under Travis Steele, and immediately turns them around to take them to the Sweet 16. And then you kind of throw out last year with the injuries that they had. I mean, I talked to Sean during summer practices in August, and he said just this past August, and he said, last year at this time, because the injuries to Fremantle and Hunter, we were still recruiting at this time. So they brought in 3 international transfers and first time playing college basketball, first time in America, and it was just it led to Xavier's first losing season in nearly 3 decades. But I think in this world of college basketball, where you've seen a lot of coaches step out, retire earlier than some might think with the transfer portal and NIL. Sean Miller's really embraced that, and you just look at Xavier's recruiting classes. Last year they had Jonathan Powell. He gets out and he goes to West Virginia, and then this year coming up they only have 2 recruits coming in. So he's fully embraced the ever-changing world of college basketball, and it's led to Xavier making the NCAA tournament 2 out of his 3 seasons.
It's great stuff. All right, we'll pull the plug right there. The very end of that interview was just exchanging pleasantries and thanking Shelby for his time. I will thank Shelby for his time right now. Great conversation previewing tomorrow night's matchup between Texas and Xavier. On tomorrow's show, we'll talk more about the Longhorns' first 4 game against the Musketeers. We'll also recap Texas baseball's midweek game against UTSA that happens tonight. And we'll, of course, talk some Longhorn football as well. Plenty more to get to. But thank you for watching today and listening today. And thank you for making Locked On Longhorns your first listen today. Your second listen should be the Locked On College Basketball Show with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here. So be the most informed college basketball fan throughout all of the madness. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate y'all tuning in today. I'm BK Brad Kellner. Horns up, mic's off. We'll see you next time on Locked On Longhorns.